This is a episode in my series entitled Spiritual Lessons from Black and White America. It's episode 10, and it has a very, very interesting title, Pretty Boy Floyd. And Pretty Boy Floyd, for some of you, you may know he was a famous gangster that is going to meet his end in 1934, along with a lot of the other famous gangsters. But in the early 1930s, which is where we're at in our series, he is going to be a prominent figure. And he, at one point in time, after Dillinger is killed, he is going to become public enemy number one. There's always only one spot available for that. And so he's going to be public enemy number one. But I'm going to stop just for a second before I get into this. And I just want to sort of almost do a summary, but I don't know if it's a summary as much as it is an attempt for me to start to gain some articulation here. I'm going through a series, and this series is very significant for me, even if it's not significant for anyone else out there. It seems to be some kind of gymnastics routine for my soul, where I'm going through a process of being touched by the Spirit of God and sensitized by the Spirit of God towards very specific things, not just in our nation, but in myself. And I feel like by staring at our nation's ailments, God is able to touch certain vulnerabilities in me or leanings in me. And you'll notice I have labored in this not to approach this according to my typical disposition, which of course I try and do anyways. Ellerslie represents a mixture. It's a mixture of Bible-believing Christians, but from all sorts of denominations. But we all have a tendency to lean conservative. And of course, I would look at that as a very positive thing. And the way I would interpret conservatism in Christianity is someone who believes the Bible to actually be the Word of God, and that it believes that what it says is true. And when it reveals Jesus Christ as the one and only means of salvation, we hold to that with our life. And when it points to that one man, Jesus Christ, is not just fulfilling the scriptures, but being the fulfillment of all the promises of the Messiah and being God himself in the flesh. And then that God is going to go to that cross and do that work, and that work is the work that saves, that I am going to put all my chips, from the poker table onto that, and I'm going to say that's what I believe. So I'm going to call that a conservative. Now that's not what some of us would deem a conservative. Some of us in here would deem a conservative how you vote politically and how you lean socially, or what you think on gun laws and how you view immigration. And that is a very dangerous thing when Christianity begins to wear the glasses of political conservatism instead of just understanding this is what we hold to. We hold dear the words of truth. But we live in a generation where we have grown up around a version of Christianity that is either wearing conservative political glasses or liberal political glasses. And that creates a tension in the church and even splits in the church that we don't want to foster. And so it's very hard to go through American history, especially when you're teaching it, because almost everything is political. Almost everything I could bring up is sharply a divided issue at the time. Now, I could totally avoid the political, social landscape of America, and I could talk about other things. It's like, let's talk about, farming in the Midwest. And I could, try and neuter it of all political issues. Ironically, then you get to still political issues. No matter what you do, if I said farming in the Midwest, you're going to be like, yeah, that's the cause of the Dust Bowl. You know what? You know who said that? You know who started that idea of, the rain follows the plow? Yeah. We could get into all sorts of arguments over every single thing I could bring up. What I don't want is to further divide us as the body. I want to unite us as the body to say, what are we supposed to do today to reveal Jesus in this world? How can we effectively reach this world for Christ? We have impediments that are deep-seated. If you're in Great Britain and you are trying to win someone from France, that's a very hard thing to do. And so when we started out this series, we were talking about the Lux blanket, and we're going to see this movement that is going to change the course of history of how a king of England is going to engage the people of France. It's very fascinating to me, and it intrigues me. And I'm saying, what am I supposed to do to engage this world? There's sectors of this world that look at me because I'm a pastor, because of my skin color. They find it just because I'm male. It doesn't matter. I mean, just being a man is enough to, cause certain people to cut me off. Or how about this? Because I'm decidedly a man. And it's like, no, I'm happy to be a man. Whoa, I mean, that's even worse. And because of these factors, it can create division points. And I'm saying, I want to reach across that division. But it's not easy to do because it's not me necessarily always creating the division. So what do I do when there's hostilities towards me? This is quite a few years, let's say 10 years ago or so. I remember walking into King Soopers after church, and there was someone that was visiting our church that day. And she came up to me, and she said, I used to hate you. I was like, oh, well thank you. And she said, everything you would do made me mad. And whatever you said, I just despised it. And I'm thinking, why were you listening? That was going through my head. And yet there was something, she didn't go into the full story, but then she said, but then God reached me. He reached into my fog bank and he changed me. And I recognized I was hosting, I don't remember how she described it, in a Jezebel spirit or an anti-man spirit. It's like, oh. And she said, now I love you. And it was like, oh, well, great. But it was this odd conversation that is, always stood out to me because it resonates with so many different experiences I've had where I represent something. As a leader, that's just what happens. You represent a group, and I represent a certain type of person. And if you are, hosting different things on the devil's side of the ledger, yeah, I can understand why you wouldn't like that group. That group is decidedly pro-Jesus. That group is decidedly Bible-centered. And if you're, entertaining the devil at any level in your life, I could see how that could not translate well. I've had a lot of people hate me. But, I'm always thinking, what's their reason for hating me? And sometimes it's just who I am. It's what I represent. I'm sort of used to that after all these years, but that's kind of what this message is about. What do you do when someone hates you just because of what you represent? My white skin represents something. So what do I do to reach a world that looks at my white skin as if I'm hosting a certain animosity towards them? Or because I stand for biblical purity and excellence in marriage, how about someone from the LGBTQ plus community? They could look at me as a symbol of everything that harms them and everything that demeans them. And yet I want to reach them. I have a deep love and a care for them. So how do we break through those barriers? Part 10, Pretty Boy Floyd. So I'm not going to show a picture of Pretty Boy Floyd yet, okay? I'll have some pictures for you as we go. But here's a description of Pretty Boy Floyd. A walking chunk of mean mad. Isn't that a great description of a man? So this comes from a quote from a character in John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath named Ma Jode. And she's going to describe Pretty Boy Floyd. Because remember, that the Grapes of Wrath is happening during the Great Depression. This is exactly when this is happening. So here's Ma Jode talking. I knowed Pretty Boy Floyd. I knowed his ma. They was good folks. He was full of hell, sure, like a good boy ought to be. He done a bad thing and they hurt him. Caught him and hurt him. So he was mad, and the next bad thing he done was mad, and they hurt him again. And pretty soon he was mean mad. They shot at him like a varmint, and he shot back. And then they run him like a coyote, and him a snapping, a snarling, mean as a lobo. And he was mad. And he wasn't a boy or a man no more. He was just a walking chunk of mean mad. But the folks that knowed him didn't hurt him. He wasn't mad at them. Finally, they run him down and killed him. No matter what they say it in the paper, how he was bad, that's how it was. So, I don't know how you feel just in hearing that quote. First of all, you may not have understood a word I said. but a walking chunk of mean mad. My heart, and it's strange. It's like there's a part of me, the guy that, doesn't like this type of nonsense taking place in our country. I don't want these gangsters going around. He was a gangster. He was a hoodlum. He was a kidnapper, a bank robber. He was a murderer. I mean, everything bad is this guy. But he was a mean chunk of mean mad. He was a walking chunk of mean mad. And this was not isolated at this time. There's a lot of hurting people in the world because of this Great Depression. When that stock market crashes, there's a lot of people that even though banks are going to close and even though, jobs are going to be lost, there's certain people, especially ones that work for the government, they're going to keep their job. And suddenly the government is going to not look so hot. The FBI is going to start exploding in size to deal with all the crime from the mob to this gangster movement. And so the police force is growing and the people are suffering. And you could just imagine how that translates. It's like, I don't have a job, but if you work for the government, you do. And the government is, we're always susceptible to have a negative view towards the government. It's a human thing. It's a us-they thing. And so this is going to explode in this time. So when the Great Depression is going on, we have a lot of unhappy people, a lot of walking chunks of mean mad. So I'm going to introduce you to one of the walking chunks of mean mad, Giuseppe Zangara. He was a walking chunk of mean mad. And that's an understatement. So he's an Italian immigrant, and he is going to have a sharp pain in his stomach that he's going to live with for years. But he's going to lose everything in the Great Depression. He's going to come here expecting to find some kind of hope and some kind of future. Instead, he's going to find misery and poverty. And he's had enough. And he just wants to take it out of the government. He wants to penalize them for the penalty he's given to them. So Roosevelt has just been elected. He isn't yet sworn in. So this is in February, before he's going to be sworn in March. And he's giving a speech down in Florida. He's just standing in the back of a car. And the mayor of Chicago is standing next to him. And Zangara is going to shoot 5 shots. And he's going to miss Roosevelt. Roosevelt's going to actually survive this incident. The mayor of Chicago standing next to him, Anton Cermak, who had just gotten into office, who was renovating Chicago to deal with all the gangsters. He was going to take out all the mob. And he dies, which has led to many conspiracies, how he was actually the one Zangara was after. Zangara never said that. But Giuseppe Zangara is not a happy man. Here he is. So you can see a picture of this very unhappy walking chunk of mean mad. He was mean. He was mad. So here's what he said when he arrived at the courthouse, February 15th, 1933. I have the gun in my hand. I kill kings and presidents first and next all capitalists. Then when he's told that he was sentenced to 80 years in prison, 4 times 20 is 80. Oh, judge, don't be stingy. Give me 100 years. And then when he's informed that he was sentenced to death by electrocution, see, Anton Cermak was shot. He's the mayor of Chicago. And then 19 days later, he's going to die. And they're going to determine that he died because of that gunshot. And so now he's going to get the electric chair. And so this is what Giuseppe Zangara said. You give me electric chair, I no afraid of that chair. You one of capitalists, you is crook man too. Put me in electric chair, I no care. And then when he's strapped into the electric chair, Viva Italia, goodbye to all poor peoples everywhere. Push the button, go ahead, push the button. Now here's what I'm feeling as I go through that. I'm not mad at Giuseppe Zangara. I feel for Giuseppe Zangara. Do I like what Giuseppe Zangara did? No. But I have a well of compassion to say this man is lost. He's a boat without a rudder. He thinks that he will salve and solve this pain inside of him by exacting pain in someone else. And this is a classic misnomer in humanity, that if you're struggling with pain, that you should, bring pain to someone else and somehow that will satisfy you. And it doesn't. And he's only meaner after he does this. Because anytime, when you're the victim and you do something wrong and then they come back and they hit you again with, a sentence, they put you in handcuffs and you get even more mad. And then they throw you in a jail and you get even more mad, because that's just the way they are, these capitalists. And it escalates. But what is needed in this man's life is something other than this pattern. Bad guy does bad thing. Good guy disciplines bad guy. Makes bad guy mad. Good guy gets mad at bad guy because bad guy spits in his face. And then they have this thing going back and forth where both guys technically end up being bad guys. I don't know if you've ever turned into a bad guy even when you started out good guy, because the bad guy isn't responding very well. So your good guy thing suddenly turns into a bad guy behavior because you're sick and tired of the way the bad guy's behaving. And I could say in a strange way, this is a common problem in American history. Now, this is a common problem in human history. But in American history, I'm going to walk through it here, but this is a very odd thing. And it's a thing that I want to touch in us. I want to be a good guy, right? I mean, it's a good ambition in life, right? To be the good guy. But I want to be a good guy that responds to the bad guy as a good guy. I don't want to become a bad guy to deal with the bad guy. I don't know if that made any sense. What do you do with a Giuseppe Zangara? That's the challenge of the ages. I've had many Giuseppe Zangaras in my life. They're not always wielding pistols. Sometimes they're just wielding bad attitudes. They're critical spirits. They're divisive in their nature. They're not pleasant for any environment, and yet they have hurt in their life. What do you do with the Giuseppe Zangara? Governments have really struggled to know what to do with Giuseppe Zangaras. Police forces in communities don't know what to do with Giuseppe Zangaras because they put him in jail or they discipline him and they realize the guy becomes meaner. It's like, what is necessary? So I'm going to use a term that maybe you're familiar with, they. Who's they? You ever had that question? Who's they? Well, they don't like it when I do this. And then someone leans in and goes, who's they? We all have a they, by the way. They is a real group. And sometimes it has one face on it. It's like your mom, and her face is on they, right? Or it's some guy that said something to you once in school, and his face pops up, and he is the embodiment of they. Even though there's a lot more people with him, his face is right there. They. Them. It's the same as they. It's them, right? It's the them out there. The man is another term for it. The system, the government, the oppressors. And so this is an attitude that is created, and it is very easily stimulated in all of us too. It's a leadership and an authority issue. That when authority doesn't handle their authority well, it creates a disassociation. We don't no longer identify with that authority. Now we identify against that authority. This is going to lead to a movement right around the mid-1800s. And I'm not going to say it has dissipated by 1930. It's just is changing its labels. But it's called the anarchist movement. And the anarchist movement is going to begin to emerge when governments begin to be so strong, militarily speaking, that a small pack of rebels actually just get destroyed when they try and stand up against the military of that government. So revolutions were always how you would express your dissatisfaction. It's like, we're going to just overthrow the government. And so you take on the military of that government, you form your little band of military guys, and you go and you attack and you form a coup, and you take over the government. Well, military development is going to get to the point where a revolution just becomes impossible. It doesn't work the way it used to. So there's going to be a new tactic, and that is take out the leader. Just take out the leader. So you begin to hate the leader. The man that leads is now suddenly your target, because that's how you destabilize the government. You may not be able to overcome them with military power, but one guy willing to give up his life and walk in with a bomb and blow up the leader, which is going to happen multiple times in this period, actually can change the course of history. And you can just sort of see this whetting the appetite of the little guy. The little guy in this whole period of time is going to become a big guy. That's what the Bolshevik Revolution, which is going to take Russia and turn it into the USSR, is going to be. It's going to be a whole bunch of little guys standing up and sticking out their, well, I'm going to say thumbing their nose and sticking out their tongue. I don't know if that's the description of what the Bolshevik Revolution was. And more like spit in the face and bop them in the nose of the government. And this 300-year empire, this monarchy that has ruled Russia is going to topple. And the people are suddenly going to rule. Now, it's really not the people that rule any more than it is that Zangara actually feels good once he, kills Anton Cermak. There was no benefit to him. He just died in an electric chair. It's the same with the people of Russia. Lenin takes over. Guess what? The people of Russia are no better off under Soviet power than they were under the monarchy of the Romanovs. It's still misery. It's not actually the solution, and yet it looks like a solution on paper. So when revolutions no longer seem feasible, you can always try to take out leaders of the corrupt government. So this is going to lead to a term in history. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but now you will have. You'll be an expert on it. The man. And you can say, the man? I mean, that's just a word that I understand, but the man. No, the man is the statement to denote government, yes, mainly, but whoever's in charge. So like the boss of a business, he's the man. And so there's an idea that is going to spread, especially in this time period. The man is keeping me down is a famous quote, which is translated as being, I'm being oppressed by the current government. Or stick it to the man. That's translated as, let's fight back and let the government know we aren't taking this. So let's hit them. Let's hit the government however we can. Let's stick it to the man. So it's interesting because even though that's talking about government, I feel it. Anyone who steps into leadership feels this because you immediately become the man. Even if you're a woman, you're the man in that situation. And you feel it. I don't know if you've ever had this where you have a whole bunch of buddies and you work at a job and then you're promoted and suddenly you're over your buddies. There's nothing worse, guys, because now your buddies start gathering off to the side and meeting for coffee, and you feel like they're talking about you, and they might be. And they no longer hang out with you. Now when they walk by you, they sort of sneer at you in the hall. What did I do to deserve this, is the question that pops into your mind. Well, you didn't do anything, but now you're the man. And so you think you're all that. Now that you're over us, huh? And so there's a disassociation leadership. Have you ever heard the statement by Elizabeth Elliot? Loneliness is a required course for leadership. A leader is lonely because everyone else looks at them as the man. It's like, oh yeah, you think you're all that. And it's not an easy position to be a leader. And yet, I think it's important for all of us. Like here's from my vantage point. I want to be an expert in Giuseppe Zangara, not to behave like him, but to understand him. So that when I am a leader, I can actually effectively deal with a Giuseppe Zangara. And technically what I'm doing is I'm summarizing this entire series with that statement. I want to know how to deal with Giuseppe Zangara. I want to know how to deal with a walking chunk of mean mad. Lord Jesus, teach me, because that's our generation right now. We have a whole bunch of people that hate what I represent. Now, if they hate me because of what I represent, what they do is they hate Jesus. They hate the truth. They hate the light. That's not unusual in human history, guys. And so for me, I want to know in this day and generation how I am supposed to respond as Jesus would have me respond so that I can win that person. And if Giuseppe Zangara is still going to die in the electric chair, I still want to be there. And I want to see him confess Jesus on his lips before he dies. That's the desire, is to change this storyline. Instead of having us stand up and cheer and go, look at our justice system in America. You see, you do what Giuseppe did and this was what you get. Yeah, it's true. It's a good justice system and I'm not going to complain about that. However, in the midst of that justice system, there needs to be mercy, and that's us as the church, that don't intervene to try and stem justice, but we intervene with mercy unto the man, even in his circumstance and in his prison cell. We don't leave him to rot. We seek to save him even if justice has to still be served to preserve the integrity of justice in our nation. Authority problems. Now, this is going to be an interesting exercise for every single one of us in here. What if all you have ever known is corrupt policemen? You know that there are certain people in our country that have had far more exposure to corruption than they have to excellence and integrity in policing. So what if, just hypothetically, because I'm not talking about you, I'm just saying, but what if? What if all you have ever known is corrupt policemen? What if you have watched policemen being paid off to turn their back on a crime? What if you have seen that? What if you have watched policemen turn their backs on the lynching of a black man? And imagine the black man was related to you or a good friend. You could just imagine your opinion that is going to develop through that towards policemen who are supposed to be law keepers, who are supposed to keep order, who are supposed to protect that innocent man, who are supposed to keep people from taking the law into their own hands, and yet they did nothing. What if you have known police chiefs to actually be grand wizards in the Ku Klux Klan? That's the big dogs. And now imagine, because I'm not trying to be racial in this particular message, however, I can't help it. Because there is a racial element to what is taking place even in this time that I haven't gotten to yet. I'm dealing with more some bigger cultural things. But this is going to create a basis of what we see today. So when you see Black Lives Matter, the BLM movement, it is stemming from something. I am not complimenting the movement itself. Its root system is actually not healthy. But why it is there and in existence should make sense to us. It is a problem with authority where authority has been abused in the past. So now I'm going to flip this around. And I have something on the screen which is very dangerous to stick on the screen. And I'm not trying to make it as a statement, political statement. I'm saying this is an entire ideology. When you see BLM and you see this defunding the police thing, most of us in here are absolutely incredulous. Like, you have got to be insane. You want to defund the police. Why? Why does it not make any sense to us? And why would we stand and say blue lives matter? Well, there's a good reason for that. Because our exposure and our experience, even though we know there's some bad cops out there, is that they are generally, for the most part, honest men and women. And they desire for the community to be kept safe and healthy. That's our experience. See, it's a very different experience. So what if all you have ever known is good-hearted policemen? Well, how are you going to respond when someone starts to criticize policemen and say that they're all out to get people? It's like, what? That is not true according to your experience. What if you have watched policemen fight for justice and seek to do that which is right? What if you have watched policemen die in the line of duty and in preserving the community's safety? What if you have known police chiefs that genuinely and honestly care about the people they serve? You see this divide here? You see, part of the challenge we're facing is we have different experiences in this country. And depending on how you are going to grow up in this country and what your heritage is going to bring a very, very different take and perspective towards something like police. Because I could go back in time to 1930s, and I can show you some professional policemen known as the FBI, and I'm going to walk through this story of Pretty Boy Floyd, and you're going to recognize what could cause people to actually distrust the police. So the sliding scale of confidence, at what point, because we have two extremes in this. We have one group that has only seen negative, right? We have this other side that has only seen positive. Most of us know that it's a mix. That's what we know, okay? I don't think any of us is an idiot on either side of the ledger. I'm sure people that think that there's corruption in the police force also know that there's probably good people in the police force. And those that believe that there are good people in the police force also know that there's corruption that can leak in. And we also know, yes, that in places like Chicago, the whole police force can be bought off, right? So we have our story. We've seen our movies of, mob rule over Chicago. Yeah, we know how those things can happen, but that's not the general rule of thumb. So whichever way you're looking at it, here's the question. At what point do you begin to question the care of your authority? And at what point does resistance actually show wisdom and not rebellion? You know that there have been governments that were hostile towards people groups and intended to kill them. And so at a certain point, if you knew that you were not favored by the government and they were out to get you, at what point do you resist? At what point along the sliding scale do you submit? Oh, no, resist. I mean, is there a point, or do you just submit, die? That's part of the historic question, even for Christians. Like even Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a pacifist, if you can imagine this, is going to be a part of the planting of a bomb to kill Hitler. Just like shocking. Dietrich, did you do that? Because aren't you just supposed to submit? However, he has seen a people group being wiped out. And he says, someone has to do something. At what point do you do something? At what point do you determine that something is unhealthy and you would respond? Now, it's interesting. If you see something as healthy, of course, you're going to say, hey, you should never do that. That form of revolution is dangerous. But if you're on the other side of the ledger, which we would look at as the leftist side, they're always trying to overthrow governments. But they, ironically, oftentimes represent the impoverished class, and they feel underrepresented. They feel like the government is full of all the, has all the wealth just sort of coming out of their pockets. Meanwhile, there's this other class that isn't eating. And you look at the French Revolution, that's true. They weren't eating. They weren't getting the food. And so at what point in time, even though I am not a fan of revolution at all, it's just a question I'm setting out there. Is there a point when you actually say enough is enough? The reason I'm asking that is because I'm going to talk about the beginnings of the American system of government, which I highly value. I love our government. I think it's brilliant. It was at the point, the beginnings of the American system of government was at the point we began to question the care of our British authority. To this day, most Americans feel that our resistance to the British government in 1776 was a show of national wisdom and not in any way an anarchist rebellion. Boy, that's an interesting one to try and swallow. This is a phenomenon throughout history. And this is how governments shift and change. And it's challenging for us. But here's what I would like to say. I at least want us as believers to have a sensitivity. I'm not saying to agree with Giuseppe Zangara or his behavior. I'm saying for us to effectively reach him, I think we need to get in his shoes and walk around for a while. I think we need to recognize what this man has gone through and what he expected out of his country and what he witnessed instead. And then we might be able to help other Giuseppe Zangaras, not shoot Anton Cermak's and try and kill Franklin Roosevelt's. That's my proposal. Is what we have a tendency to do is just hate Giuseppe Zangaras and call them the scum of the earth and we can't wait to have them electrocuted. And I'm saying that isn't actually going to solve our problem. You know that this whole movement of anarchism is happening throughout the world at this time. And every country is going to handle it differently. Most are going to handle it sort of like we do, which is eliminate it. Publicly showcase that this is not allowed in this country. In Italy, they actually tried something different, which is a fascinating statement. And I can't even tell you how well it worked, but I'm just intrigued by it. They decided to sit down with these factions and listen to them. You don't really want to hear what they have to say because I'm sure it's not profitable. But you follow what I'm saying? I mean, it's hard for us. I sat down with someone who is very strongly in the LGBTQ plus community. And technically, she wanted to sit down with me. That was how it actually started. And she wanted to interview me for a paper for her college. I was like, oh, great. I'm sure I'll be represented well in that. But it was a very, very good conversation. And she wanted to have a second installment of it. She was like, let's do this again. Would you be open to that? I have more questions. It's like, okay. And so in the process, not just her asking me questions, but me asking her questions. But what I was able to do is I'm disciplining myself like the Italian government to go, I'm going to listen. I want to hear the grievances against the church. I want to hear the grievances even against someone like me. What could I do to more effectively gain your ear so that I could speak? Because it's interesting. She grew up in the church. She knows exactly what I'm going to say. She could say something and go, and Eric, I know exactly what you'll say to that. And I'm thinking, boy, I don't want to be that predictable. But at the same time, I do want to be predictable. My answer should always be the same, no matter what it is. And so it is true. My answer will be something, but it's probably not going to be the same tone you're expecting. You see, when you are mad at someone or a group, you have a tendency to expect them to have a tone, a defensiveness, a hatred back. But when we respond in love, even though we say what they're expecting to say, yes, that's a sin, that they can actually sense that we genuinely care about them. Us, them. It's a mentality that leads to bad things. Whenever you have an us-them mentality, which, by the way, the church is very vulnerable to it right now, us and then the entire culture out there is them. And instead of us reaching this culture, they become a them. And then that becomes the man. And then we are vulnerable to wanting to stick it to the man as the church. A walking chunk of mean mad, Charles Pretty Boy Floyd. You guys excited to see a picture of Charles Pretty Boy Floyd? There he is. I actually he has better pictures that are cleaner, but I like this one. It makes me feel like it's older, and it somehow, fell into a tub and got a little wrinkled around the edges. But just your average kid grew up on a farm boy in the Midwest, and good athlete. And yeah, he, according to Ma Jode, he had a little bit of hell in him, which she thinks is good for a boy. I'm not exactly sure if I would agree, raising my boys, that I would encourage them in that. But there's Pretty Boy Floyd. Ma Jode's quote was, "He wasn't a boy or a man no more. He was just a walking chunk of mean mad." Why? Because he did something wrong, and then he got hit for it. And then he got mad that he got hit for it. And so he did something again, and they hit him harder. And then he got even more mad. And what we have is a cycle that is not just isolated to Pretty Boy Floyd. This is a problem in our culture at this time. We are making walking chunks of mean mad, which I just want to say, our government is increasing its justice system, and we are getting serious because of what's happening with the mob, what's happening with the gangsters. We're getting serious with crime. You can get serious with crime, but you also need to get serious with the souls of your people. And so what's happening is, in getting serious with crime, we are forgetting the value of the individual soul, and we're treating them like trash. And when you begin to treat a sector of your society like trash, they feel it. And it becomes us, them, and then they rally together and they want to fight back. And that's precisely what is happening here. The death of Pretty Boy Floyd, it wasn't pretty. So here's another picture this is the mugshot of Charles Arthur Pretty Boy Floyd. Now this is a very debatable, arguable statement. I'm going to read what was written in 1979 in Time magazine, and I'll comment on it afterwards. Retired East Liverpool Police Captain Chester Smith described events differently of how Charles Floyd died. In 1979 issue of Time magazine, he was credited with shooting Floyd first, and he stated that he had deliberately wounded Floyd but not killed him. I knew Purvis, so Purvis is the head FBI guy in this scene. And he says, "I knew Purvis couldn't hit him, so I dropped him with 2 shots from my .32 Winchester rifle." According to Smith's account, Floyd fell and did not regain his footing, and Smith then disarmed him. At that point, Purvis, remember he's the main FBI guy, ran up and ordered, "Back away from that man, I want to talk to him." Purvis questioned Floyd briefly and received curses in reply. So he ordered Agent Herman Hollis to fire into him. Hollis then shot Floyd at point-blank range with a submachine gun, killing him. The interviewer asked if there was a cover-up by the FBI, and Smith responded, "Sure was," because they didn't want it to get out that he'd been killed that way. All right, so now imagine, because this is hotly debated. There were other people on the scene that said, that is not how it happened. But now it's out. Okay, so you have this group that is already suspect of the police. And you have this other group that is very defensive of the FBI. The FBI can do no wrong. And then a story like this leaks, and wow, you have issues. But what you're seeing is something that is going to resonate with a whole sector of society. and that is an inhumane treatment of what would be deemed in the FBI's mind as trash. They know that they look at Pretty Boy Floyd as trash. Everyone does, because even the FBI will consider him such, even in their public announcements. We need to rid this culture of this sort of trash, these kind of varmints. And it's part of the Americanism of this age that we have the people that truly love hardworking America, that are willing to roll up our sleeves and go through a depression with excellence and with integrity and morality intact. And then we have these sort. And all of us can agree, these sort don't deserve mercy. They don't deserve the proper channels of justice. They don't get Miranda rights. Shoot them. Can you understand why this can create, in and amongst the walking chunks of mean mad, a little bit of retaliatory angst? Just imagine. The funeral of Pretty Boy Floyd, 20,000 to 40,000 people, the largest still to this day in Oklahoma history. That's how the people responded. They flocked to this. Now, their motives are a little sketchy, and you've never seen so much crime in a memorial service as this. If you read the story, it's actually, you want to laugh out loud and cry at the same time, but there are people like shoving, shooting, knocking people out of trees because they had, cameras, and so it was like stomping on graves and stomping on all the flowers and all the graves, and it was just like a whole bunch of hoodlums is the way it felt, but that's exactly what's happening in America. There's a certain crowd that is identifying with Pretty Boy Floyd. They're like, he's our hero. Well, what about J. Edgar Hoover? The guy that leads the FBI? He's the one that's cleaning things up. We hate him. Why would you hate him? He's like pro-America. He's pro cleanness on the streets. He doesn't want banks to be robbed. He doesn't want police to be shot. Well, the police deserve to be shot, is what you hear over here. So what you have is a crisis, guys. That's what we're dealing with in America. And so here I am as a leader, and I want to engage this same crisis today, even though it takes on different forms. We don't have gangsters running around with nicknames like, Babyface Nelson and Scarface or Pretty Boy Floyd. We don't have that cool stuff, Bonnie and Clyde. I mean, those are fun names, right? We don't have that anymore, but we have the same problem. So here's a description of the funeral. Despite their criminal feats, newspapers, magazines, and radio transmissions habitually glamorized Depression-era gangsters like Floyd. To some of the economically depressed, Floyd was a Robin Hood rather than a notorious criminal. Maybe no one felt that more in their hearts than the masses of eastern Oklahoma. Now remember what's happening in Oklahoma at this time. Over 440,000 people are going to be lose their homes and be wandering migrants in this time because of the Dust Bowl, because of what is going to take place. And so this is precisely where this is happening. The modern day Robin Hood? So listen to Ian Harvey write this. He became known for his kindness. This is speaking of Pretty Boy Floyd, bestowing those who assisted him with cash. He also fed 12 families. According to the book Life and Death of Pretty Boy Floyd by Jeffrey S. King, hiding out in the caves and gorges and forests of the hills gave him the nickname the Phantom of the Ozarks. Part of the urban myth attached to Floyd is that he blackened farmers' mortgages, which means he paid them off, to stop banks from foreclosing. There is little to no proof of such events. We don't actually know, but you can see the legend forming that he is actually the good guy in the story. Now, it's very likely that he's not the good guy in the story. Let me help you with that. But it is interesting to see how our culture will take this and create a sharp divide. Have you ever noticed the same thing happens with liberals and conservatives today? Same event, and a liberal will look at it as terrible, and a conservative will say, that is one of the greatest, most heroic things that's ever been done. And the liberals will say, that's evil. Like, what? How could it be completely different from two different lenses? But it has to do with your interpretation, which usually has a motive behind it, which has something to do with the government and your political stance at the time. A madness in the air that is hard to explain. A description of the late 1920s and early 1930s. Remember this quote? This is in my Monday edition that never made it to the air because it never recorded. There was a madness in the air that seemed hard to explain. Yeah, kind of like that. And it sort of feels like a little 2020-ish as well, where things are so chaotic and absurd and what we would say insane. Do you guys remember that that little part of Seattle that was taken over, and it was like this anarchist village where they're like, have their guns and everything. It's like, we're a nation unto ourselves. And we're like, is this really happening? Oh yes, this was happening. And it was very Pretty Boy Floyd-esque. It was based on the same exact stuff. And so the parallels are off the charts, guys, the more you study this. So I want you to look at the screen closely. If you're getting this via podcast, you're not going to have the same luxury of this. But the death of Charles Floyd, 1934. Now I want you to watch the screen. The death of George Floyd, 2020. Whoa. Do you guys see any similarities to these two things other than their last name? Is that remarkable or what? What you have is one side of the ledger is going to see an evil, corrupt police force. Ironically, the conservatives on this are not necessarily supportive of what happened to George Floyd. That is not what any conservative would ever say, was that was handled well. That was very poorly done, right? That was bad. But they're not going to blame the police force in general for it. And so you're going to see a sharp divide on this exact point, but it's going to lead to riots. It's going to lead to, back then it led to the biggest funeral in the history of Oklahoma. In our day, it's going to lead to a massive movement against the police in our country. Responding to chunks of mean mad. What is our strategy? So I'm going to give, Paul's going to give some strategy for us, which at first isn't going to sound like it's helpful. Paul says in Romans 12:18, if it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. And you're like, Paul, I don't think you live in 2023. Or if we lived back then, Paul, I don't think you live in 1933. I don't think you recognize that you can't just live peaceably with this sort. They're mean chunks, or they're walking chunks of mean mad. And I think Paul does actually understand. You have to recognize this guy. I have a teaching, I don't remember what the sermon was called, where I walk through Paul's adventures, his journeys. And every city he comes into, the poor guy is persecuted. I mean, he has it rough. I think he understands. How do you deal with walking chunks of mean mad? And then Romans 12:21 says this, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. What if we were to say, instead of evil, walking chunks of mean mad? Don't be overcome by walking chunks of mean mad, but overcome walking chunks of mean mad with good. You see, part of it is our disposition. We have access to something in our souls via the Holy Spirit that is able to not become a bad guy when we are hit by a bad guy. We're walking as a good guy, and then the bad guy comes and spits in our face, and we're like immediately becoming bad guys back by spitting back. Now, we still claim to be the good guy because we didn't initiate it. Sounds like World War I and World War II. The Allies are always like, well, we're the good guys because we did not initiate it. Yeah, but you also did some other stuff too. Now, I'm not trying to throw the Allies under the bus. I'm cheering for them. But it's very easy, and I know how that can happen even as a parent. Okay, I'm minding my own business being a good dad, right? And then there's a bad behavior, and that bad behavior can elicit a bad response out of me. I am very prone to a bad response. It's a weird thing, but it's human. And so I have to take the grace from heaven to not respond in a bad way to a bad behavior, but to respond in the right way, in a good way to bad behavior. We overcome evil with good. So I'm going to introduce you to a concept called the stronger, the considerate one. Now that's going to make sense as we go forward, but in every situation, there's a stronger and a weaker party. The stronger party is responsible to carry the weight of reconciliation. So in a nation, that would be the government. The government is actually the stronger party, and there are weaker parties all over, throughout a country. And I'm going to say, philosophically speaking, theologically speaking, the government should live in a considerate or understanding way with its citizens. And that would be an important quality to not just the overall government, but every member of government. So if you're a politician, I'd like to call it a statesman, if you are someone who cares for your country and that's the reason you're serving it, well, then you should actually prove that by caring for the people of your country. And if you have Giuseppe Zangaras, you should actually maybe pull in Italy and maybe listen to them and see what their grievance is. Now, they may spit in your face and try and shoot you as you do it. And, hey, you can only go so far with this, right? You can't, if someone doesn't want to talk, doesn't want to share, well, then there's not a lot you can do, but you can still go after them. So I'm going to call it the stronger in every situation that exists. So in a family, I would be the stronger one. That means I'm the one responsible to be considerate. It doesn't mean that everyone else is excused from being considerate. It just means that's my priority position. I am held accountable by God for being that. So 1 Peter 3:7 talks about this. It's talking about a husband and a wife. Husbands likewise dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. So that shows that a husband, when he is not considerate and not living in an understanding way, will be hindered in his spiritual productivity. His prayers will be hindered. His agenda on this earth is actually not going to be effective if he doesn't live in an understanding way with his wife, honoring her as a weaker vessel. He's the stronger, she's the weaker. He's responsible as the stronger to be the considerate, listening, understanding one. So I'm going to modify 1 Peter 3:7 to try and make a point. Now, you can apply this straight across the board. So if you're looking at this situation with Pretty Boy Floyd, you can apply that. But you can also apply it in your own soul, because you're the Christian. You're the one set free. You're the one that can see things. You're the one that actually should have the vantage point of heaven towards the needs of their soul. You're the stronger party, guys. So listen, dear stronger party, I think he's talking to us. In your relationship toward the weaker party, I give you this admonition. Dwell with them with understanding. That's the New King James Version. Dwell with them according to knowledge. That's the King James Version. Be considerate as you live with them. That's the NIV. Live with them in an understanding way. That's the ESV and the NASB. Treat them with consideration as the weaker partners. That's the New English Translation. Live considerately with them. That's the RSV. So this is how we take them, the weaker party in our life. So yes, that's talking about a husband and a wife, but what if we were to take that as a basic principle? This is how, by the way, Jesus is going to live with his weaker party. He's the stronger, we're the weaker. To live considerately, to understand another's perspective. So this is what it would mean. To respect another's viewpoint, to comprehend another's challenges, to not take lightly another's opinions, but rather to place weight upon another's concerns, value upon another's viewpoint, and practical action toward making things work better for another party. So if someone, let's imagine one of you is like, we don't have a washing machine in our dorm, for our clothes. And so, or the dryer doesn't work. Well, then as the stronger party, the ones that are in charge of Ellerslie, it is important for us to address that, right? If you sense that we don't care, that immediately starts to percolate through the ranks. It's like, I don't care at all. Here are my clothes. You're wearing wet clothes to class. Or imagine you're falling through the chair. You sit on the chair and you fall through. And these chairs don't hold us up. It's like, get over it. You see, an unfeeling or an inconsiderate government or an inconsiderate stronger party actually ends up creating a rancid relationship if it doesn't listen, if it doesn't heed, if it doesn't receive appeal. Hebrews 4:15, listen to Jesus. This isn't Jesus talking, but this is a description of Jesus. For we do not have a high priest, that's a representative. Talk about representative government here, right? We do not have a statesman in office representing us who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. In a sense, he's going to come and sit at our dinner table. He is going to sleep in our bed. He is going to walk through our backyard. He is going to engage in our own social system. He's going to buy food from our store. He's going to live in our world and understand it from our perspective. It's like the equivalent of me going and actually getting to know Giuseppe Zangara and saying, what is it you've come from? Maybe even going to Italy and seeing his rough beginnings. He fought in World War I, and he always had a physical ailment, and he lived in tremendous pain his entire life, and nothing would take it away. There was nothing that would dim it, and he was just always in pain. And imagine me tasting of that, or being able to engage in that in a way where I said, I get it. And I could just imagine how difficult that would be. You see, I have something, and it's called a remedy. I have truth for his soul that will set him free. That doesn't mean he wants to hear it. But if he's going to hear it, it's likely because he's going to sense that I genuinely care about him. And for me to prove that I genuinely care about him, I probably need to walk a little in his shoes, and I need to understand his world. Most in the LGBTQ plus community have abuse in their background. Oftentimes very strong from a father figure in their life, like sexual abuse, and oftentimes from a church leader. The church system that they were in was very heavy-handed or very oppressive in some regard. There's various factors that tend to be common in a group. It does not mean that it always has to be a certain recipe, but for us, that should sensitize me. As a leader in the church, what should I think about that? Should I be like, well, get over it? You know, you're living a lie, you're in sin. Well, it doesn't mean they're not living a lie, and it doesn't mean they're not in sin. It's just that that isn't the attitude or the tone or the manner in which I could ever use to actually help someone. And the government can sometimes take on that tone. And, you know, this varmint, this filth, this trash. And what that does is that builds walking chunks of mean mad. The head, he's the responsible party, the one whom the onus, upon whom the onus falls. Who's responsible in this situation? Whoever describes himself as the head, the stronger party. You know, in a generation where things are falling to pieces, I know you may have never thought about this, but Jesus is the head of the church, right? He's given us strength. He's given us his strength. So we're the stronger party in this world. Imagine if we as the church raise our hand as God looks at this earth and says, what's going on down there? Sure does look like a mess. Lord, we're responsible because this is our watch and we haven't risen up to respond as you've called us. Instead of looking at the filth and saying it's their fault, I'm walking in purity, I'm walking in love towards the people that love me. Instead of saying, I'm the stronger party right now, I take the onus. This is on us. Lord, show us what to do. Correct us. So this is a message that I give at Ellerslie called The Power to Reconcile. And this is a cross that shows how reconciliation works. So if you're getting this via podcast, it's a little tricky. But at the top you have the offender, and at the bottom you have the offended. For reconciliation to happen, both have to come to the cross. God is going to be the offended, if you want to say it that way, and he is going to meet us at the cross. He's going to come to the cross, and that's where we're going to find reconciliation with him, right? But still, if we are offended, the way that we find reconciliation is we forgive, and we love, and we come to that cross with forgiveness, and we await in that middle section, right under the beam, and it says reconciliation. See, I put a star by it. But if you're the offender, there's a process that you need to walk through to actually come to that same place called reconciliation. Because you have harmed someone, you need to actually do something in response. And so the first thing you need to do is have humble understanding. You know how rare that is today? I get it. I understand why that hurts you. Could you imagine if we lugged that into this culture? And even talking with those groups that are hostile towards us, if we could give them understanding and say, I understand. If I was in a church and that's how I was treated, if I had a father that did that, I can understand. You can at least get in their shoes and have a humble understanding for what they're going through. And that's critical in reconciliation. If I harm you, it's important that you know that I harmed you and that it was a serious thing and that I get it. And what that's going to lead to is something called godly sorrow. Godly sorrow is different than worldly sorrow. Worldly sorrow says, oh, I was caught. Oh, no, now I need to serve jail time. Oh, I'm so upset. And you have sorrow over the fact that you were caught. That's not godly sorrow. Godly sorrow is touched way in here by the Holy Spirit. It's like, I have hurt God, I've hurt man. I have violated his purposes in my life. Oh, Lord. And so when we see that, we have godly sorrow, which leads to repentance, and we change our behavior. And then we confess our sin. We make it clear, even to that person, what I did was wrong. And then we'll make restitution if restitution was necessary. If we stole money, we pay it back with interest. If we told a lie, we tell the truth. We make it right to the degree that we are physically able to do it. And then we have patient grace to say, I get it. I understand why this would be tough for you to trust me. I need to build trust again. And that's patience applied with grace, that we get it, that if a husband cheats on a wife, that he just says, oh, I'm sorry. And she's like, oh, okay. But she's actually been harmed, hurt, and there's been a trauma, and they need to rebuild trust. And that's the same with anything. We are in this process today in this culture, and we are a stronger party. We are responsible to the degree that we can, if we are offended, to come with forgiveness. If we are an offender or deemed an offender, even if we did nothing, we're symbolic of being an offender. That's a tricky one, I have to admit. But what can we do to still walk through this unto a place of reconciliation? Who is responsible to make the first move? Is it the offender or the offended? Listen to Exodus 22:6. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns so that stacked grain, standing grain, or the field is consumed, he who kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. So if you kindle a fire, you're responsible to make it right. You make restitution for that fire. And I'm going to just tell you guys that there are a lot of fires being started by conservatives today. We're stirring the pot just as much as we could blame the liberals for doing it, but to whatever degree we do it, we're responsible. Matthew 5:23-24. If you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Now, whether or not we could say that's talking about a social ailment and like a group of people in the nation, I think it's still important for us to recognize if we're going to be effective in our service of Jesus Christ, sort of like we're bringing our gift to the altar. And we're saying, Lord, we want to do this for you. And he says, but could we make it right? What would we be willing to do? And part of what I'm building towards, if you can't see this, is I'm looking for a practical movement in our souls and in our lives as the Church of Jesus Christ to begin to make right things that we may not have personally done, but we may have. We may have participated in it. And I want us to take it very seriously, the fact that we are the representatives of King Jesus on this earth right now. We are the stronger party, and there is a certain responsibility that we have because of that to live in an understanding and considerate manner with those that are weaker. Not just our wives if we're husbands, not just our children if we're parents, not just our church if we're pastors, but a lost and dying world if we're a Christian. That we consider it of great importance to live with understanding. So the Christian life, I remember being asked, what is the center point, like the key principle of marriage? And I said, being forgiving and being forgivable. This was like years ago when I first started speaking on it. It's still a great truth. If you're forgiving and you're forgivable, boy, you got it made in marriage. That's a great truth. I'm going to add to that. Listen to this. The Christian life, being the considerate one in every situation. Being the one that is willing to listen. When someone's yelling, that you're willing to listen. Someone's spitting, that you receive the spittle and try and understand why they're spitting. You're the understanding one, not the retaliatory one. Leave that to the flesh. You function after the Spirit. You function after a completely different model. It's a kingdom heavenly model, and it's supernatural. Father, we need that. Lord, there's been a lot of harm in our nation, and it's created a lot of divide. But Lord, here we are in the year 2023, and we have been given grace. We've been given everything we need for life and godliness. We are strong in Christ Jesus. So Lord, show us what to do with that strength. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.